Okay, hello everybody. My name is Tom. I'm an educator here at Cheehaw Park and Zoo, as well as at Flint River Aquarium. And today we are going to be talking about another group of animals and one that I find really cool. So today we are going to be talking about birds, and we have a lot to cover because there's a lot to learn about when thinking about birds. But what we're going to talk about today is what makes a bird, how we can identify birds, some of their common characteristics, so something that all birds have, so we can really learn about them. And then we're going to focus on some cool examples of birds so we can really learn about them and see how some different birds are able to live in different areas. And it'll be really cool to talk about some different birds. So, before we start talking about those different kinds of birds, I want to talk about things that are common among birds. So, the first thing is when we think about birds, it may be a little strange to think about, but they are warm-blooded, just like we are. So just how we can be warm to the touch all the time because we can make our own body heat, birds can actually do that too. And so one of the feathers, something else that all birds have in common that we are going to talk about later, is important for them to be able to keep themselves warm because they want to be warm just like us. Okay, so they are warm blooded. And then something else that is common among birds is they all lay eggs, right? So if you've ever been in the kitchen in the morning and you have chicken eggs, that is an example of a bird egg. So we know that all birds lay eggs, and something that's pretty cool is because they have a hard shell around them, right? You have to crack your chicken eggs to get to the yolk. So what's nice about that hard shell, though, is that these eggs help to protect the birds when they are developing in that egg. So that's really important. But what's nice is, even though it has that hard shell and it may look tough, water can still be retained in the egg so that the birds won't dry out while they're developing. So they want to stay hydrated, right? We need to drink water to survive. Well, baby birds, when they're in the egg, they also need water while they're growing. And so it's nice that that hard shell egg can retain water. But there's not just water in these eggs, there's also food. So there's what we call yolk inside that egg, a little yolk sac. So it's like they have a little snack in the egg with them, which is going to be really important for them to be able to feed and have food available while they're growing and developing. Because remember, when they're in the egg, they're just really small, and that's when they start growing. So they're going to want food available to them so that they can be able to grow before they're out of that egg because they can't walk around and find food to eat, right? So that's important that they have both food and water in that egg with them. And what's even more nice is that air can pass through that egg, which is kind of weird to think about, right? But just think about kind of like a screen or something like that that air can move through. Well, those eggs, even though they have that hard shell, air can move through too. So those animals are going to have all of those basic needs that they need to survive, which is, the air, the oxygen, food, water. And then one other thing that's really important that we've already talked about is warmth, right? They're warm blooded animals and they want to stay warm. So oftentimes, what will happen is the parents or the adult birds will lay on the eggs and keep them nice and warm so that they don't have to worry about getting too cold while they're developing and just in their nest. So, something else that's not um, necessarily 100% common to birds is laying nests, but a lot of birds will lay nests. So they'll lay their eggs within that nest. They oftentimes lay more than one egg at a time. And then they can sit on that nest to keep the eggs nice and warm, which is really important. Okay, so we know birds are warm blooded, they lay eggs, that's important. And then something else about birds is that they have a skeleton just like we do. Um, and so what I have here, just to show an example, is I have the skull of a bird. So that's pretty cool, right? You can check that out. And so birds do have skeletons, but I'm going to talk about why theirs is kind of cool in just a second. So, um, one other thing that we think about when we think about birds is the most common thing, right? We think about feathers and we think about wings when we think about birds. So all birds have feathers and wings, but their use of those feathers and wings may vary quite a bit. So let's first talk about feathers. So feathers play lots of important but different roles for the bird. So different feathers are used for different things. And so one example of how a feather can be used is for flight. So give me 1 second here. So when we think about birds, we think about them flying, right? So lots of birds have wings with flight feathers that you can see right here at the end. So these are what we call primary feathers. These feathers towards the end of the wing are called primary feathers, and those are really good for flying. They are actually what birds use to push air behind them as they are flying. And then we have things like secondary feathers, which are shorter. They're found closer towards where the muscle would be. So that'd be like right here near the shoulder, right? And so both types of feathers are really important for flight though. So you can see this is quite a big wing. So what this wing belongs to is a great blue heron. If you've ever seen those birds, they're large wading birds. They're oftentimes the really tall birds that you see near the edges of wetlands or ponds or things like that. And they are big birds, right? So they're going to need a big wing, especially since those birds do fly. So they're going to need large wings with really big flight feathers to be able to take off and to stay in the air. So what these wings do is birds will flap these wings and that will push air. I could even feel it when I was doing that. They push air past them, and that's what allows them to take off and fly. So really cool. This is a really cool wing that we have here. And what you can see also is sort of where it would be attached to the body. So here's where some of the muscle and the bone would be attached. Okay, so that's one way that wings are really important. We know that birds fly and they rely on these wings for flight. And what's also important to note is that birds have a lot of extra muscle at their chest, right where their wings would be attached, right? So right where we think about our shoulders being attached, that's where their wings are going to be attached. So they need lots of extra muscle around where their wings are going to be attached. Because if you think about it, we use our arms on a daily basis and we do things like lift things and push things. But birds, they primarily need muscle if they're a bird that flies to fly. So they're going to have a lot of muscle near where those wings are going to be and near their chest bone so that they can really fly. They rely on that a lot. And I don't know about you, but if I had to fly all the time, I would want to make it easier as much as possible. Okay. Something else that birds can do with their feathers is that's really cool is a lot of birds are found in the water. So that great blue heron wing that I just showed you is a bird that's found in the water, but they're oftentimes found walking through the water. They're not getting soaked all the time. But a lot of birds, like a duck, which is what I have here is a duck wing, they are going to be found actually swimming in the water, right? We oftentimes see them cruising along on top of the water, swimming. So they're going to get wet a lot, right? Well, what they can do is they can coat themselves in a waxy layer. So they kind of put a layer of wax that looks really shiny, right? Really cool. And what that'll allow to happen is water will run right on the feather and right off. So these birds don't want to get wet and stay wet all the time. They'd rather just shear that water off of them and kind of have it fall off. Just like when we put on a raincoat or when we have an umbrella above us, the water's just going to fall right off, right? And we're not going to get wet. Well, that's kind of what a lot of birds want to do. They want to have that water just fall right off and not get them wet because they don't want to be wet and then cold all the time. So I don't know about you, but if you've ever been at the beach and then if you get out of the water and it's kind of cool out and it's windy, you're going to get more cold when you're wet. So they want to try to avoid that, and so what they'll do is they'll put that waxy layer over their feathers, and they can prevent that from happening, which is really, really cool. Great. So we've talked about flight now, water prevention, kind of like that. Another really cool thing that birds can do with feathers is they can have really pretty colors. So this is a peacock feather, and you can see the different colors. There's green, there's blue, there's some more greenish, there's some purple in there. And if you hit it at the right angle, there's lots of different colors. It's showing up different on the screen, but I'll show you a picture of a peacock in just a bit as well. But so what feathers can be really nice for, oh, there you go. There's the really nice colors. I had it backwards, my apologies. So you can see how magnificent that is. And what they'll do is they will have these bright colors to try to attract the other birds of their same kind. So they can be really important for that as well. And then lastly, we have feathers that can be really important for camouflaging. So you can see there's a really cool pattern on this wing. So this is an owl wing. So it'd be like this. And so what you can see is there's a really cool pattern. So a lot of birds are going to want to camouflage in with their environment. And so one thing that owls are really good at doing is blending in with the bark on trees. So if you ever, well, probably wouldn't see the owl, right? Because if they're sitting against the bark or sitting on a branch near a tree and the bark is behind them, they can blend in very, very well with the tree, and it's very difficult to see them. But what else I wanted to bring your attention to, and lots of birds will blend in with their environment very well and have feathers that allow them to camouflage with their environment or look the same as their background. And that's very important. So there are owls that are bright white, they're very white, and those are snowy owls, and they are found in environments with lots of snow. So this is just one example of an owl, but there's an owl wing that's completely white with black dots and speckles. So very cool. But what I also wanted to show you was some of these feathers on the inside. So you can see there's some of these soft feathers right here. And that's the last thing I wanted to talk about with feathers is there are a lot of feathers that are found closer to the body that are softer and they're smaller. And those are the feathers that are going to be very, very important for keeping birds warm. So we've been looking a lot at feathers that are found on the outside that are used for flight. So these again are some of your flight feathers, these longer ones. But the softer feathers found closer to the body, those are going to be the ones that are like our hair. They are used to keep the animal warm. So just like fur on a dog or hair on a dog, birds have feathers that will coat their body and that will help keep them warm. So again, they are warm-blooded just like we are. So we put on clothes to keep ourselves warm or coats or blankets. They pack on these really soft, warm feathers to keep themselves warm. So I hope that helps you understand all of the different uses that feathers can have. They are very important to birds, and it's really cool all the different ways in which feathers can help birds. But that's not the only unique characteristics that they have. So I'm going to share my screen now, and we're going to look at some other really cool ways that birds use feather or other characteristics, I shouldn't say. We're going to move on past feathers. Other characteristics that birds have. So give me 1 second. Okay, so first, here is that peacock that I was talking about. So you can see I showed you only one of those feathers, but you can see when they have all of those feathers packed together, how pretty this bird can be and how impressive it looks. And so that's going to be really good for trying to get the interest of other peacocks within a similar area. So that's really cool. All right, so all birds, I already showed you my example with the beak here. All birds have beaks. And what I want you to notice though, is that I have up here on my screen 3 different birds and their beaks look very different from each other, right? So they do not look the same. And so we're gonna talk about why birds are gonna have different beaks. And this is an important thing to discuss because not all birds are found in the same area, right? So they're gonna have beaks that help them survive or to be really good at eating food in whatever environment they are found in. So in the top left, I have this red bird. This is the type of bird that's gonna be flying around. Maybe you might see them flying around your house or in the forest or things like that, up in trees. So a smaller bird, kind of like a cardinal, if you've ever seen bright red birds. And what you'll notice is their beak is really, it's small. It's on the smaller end, right? It's not very long and it's not very wide. And that's because birds like this may be eating things like seeds. So if you're eating a seed, you don't really want a flat bill like this duck. You're not gonna be able to crush it with something flat like that. You want something strong and small so that you can crack open seeds and be able to eat them. Or if they're just picking berries out of trees or something like that, they don't need something huge. They just want something where they can peck, right? So this type of bird is just going to be pecking seeds or fruit or nuts. And so having a nice strong but small beak is going to be really good at doing that. And if they're flying, if you think about it, in trees or in more, closed environments, they don't want a big beak on them, right? Could you imagine the bird on the right trying to fly through the forest and the woods? I wouldn't want to have that beak attached to my face if I was trying to fly through a bunch of trees. So having a nice small beak like that is also really important for them to be able to navigate their environment. Okay, then we can go down to our duck, and you can see our duck has this, this longer bill or beak, and it's a bit flatter. And that's because, again, remember we were talking about our ducks or other birds that are going to be found in the water are going to be swimming around on top of the water. So they don't have to worry about flying through trees, and they're going to be eating things in the water. So if you think about it, they want to be able to scoop. Since they're eating off the water, they want something wider that they can scoop with. And so that bill, that flatter, broader bill, that's a bit wider, is going to help them scoop up water or food from out of the water. So they may eat things like plant material or maybe insects in the water. But either way, they want something a little bit wider so they have a better chance of catching things in the water and scooping it right up into their mouth. So that's why they have something like that. That's going to be helpful. And then lastly, over here on the right, we have this really long, narrow looking beak, right? It's not very wide, it's really narrow and long. And that's important because this is a wading bird. So when I say wading, I mean these are the types of birds that are going to have the really long legs that are going to be walking through the water. So earlier I mentioned that great blue heron that has the really long legs that's going to be walking along the edge of ponds and things like that. So not only do they have long legs that makes it easy for them to walk through water and tall plants in the water, but they also have a long beak. And that's because they're going to be eating things in the water. But if you're a bird and you're eating things in the water, shallow water on the edges of ponds, I don't know about you, but if I was a bird, every time I went to pick up something out of the water to eat, I wouldn't want to dunk my whole face in the water, right? Or get my eyes in the water. So having a nice long beak can be useful for them to just pick things out of the dirt or out of the water or out of plants without having to shove their whole face into the plants in the water. So that's really nice for being able to pick out insects or bugs or animals from environments after they spot it in those aquatic environments. So just wanted you to get an understanding as to how different beaks will help different birds depending on what kind of habitat they're found in or what kind of environment they're found in. And we're going to look at one more in just a bit that's different from any of these two. So we'll move on to feet. So all birds have feet, right? But again, the feet are going to differ depending on what kind of environment they're found in. So we can look in our top right now. This is, again, a smaller bird that's going to be found in an environment with different, or this is going to be a bird that's found flying around again. Like we were talking about earlier, you can see it has that small beak again, that small, strong beak. And so this is the type of bird that's going to be flying around in between trees and branches. And so what you can see in this picture is they have feet that are really good at gripping onto different objects. So this is more of what we would call a perching bird. And that's because they perch or sit on different objects. And so their feet are really good at gripping on to things that they can sit and fly around easily from place to place. Okay, then we went to our duck for our beaks a second, right? So now we can go back to our duck again, and that's this top middle picture with those really orange feet. And what you'll notice about these feet is the webbing in between the toes. So that webbing is going to be really important for the bird to be able to swim. So they want to push water with their webbed feet and help them swim throughout the water column. And so that's going to be really nice for them to be able to move around more easily in the water. So that's important. And then we can go to our parakeet here, this really green, pretty bird. And what you're going to notice, what I want you to take away from this, is that he's gripping on to a branch, kind of like our perching bird, or this bird in the top right. But what you may notice with his other foot is he's kind of using it like a hand. He's gripping onto some plant material, some, it looks like some kind of grass or something like that. And you can see he brought it up to his mouth. So parakeets are pretty cool in that they can even use their feet kind of like hands to walk around, to grab things, to feed themselves. And so that's pretty unique and interesting. And then lastly, what I want you to see is these talons. So we've been talking a lot about birds that eat plant material or things like seeds or grasses in the water, or maybe some insects in the water. But now we're moving on to a type of bird that is going to be flying around in the air, looking for larger things to eat, like rats or other mammals or things like snakes. We're moving into bigger animals now. And so having those really big talons with those really long nails is going to be very important for picking up and catching and holding food that they're able to catch. So I'm going to stop sharing for just a second. And so what you'll see is that a lot of birds will have these really, really strong talons that they really do. They clench down with them and they grip and they can hold food and carry it back to wherever they can eat. So having these really big nails that you can see, they're really sharp and they're not going to let go of a whole lot once they have it, which is going to be really useful for catching and holding on to food. So that's nice. And so those are going to be your birds like eagles and hawks and things like that that are hunters. So if they're hunting food, that means they're searching after it, they're catching it, and then they're going to eat it. And I'm going to show you a really cool hunter in just a little bit to give you an example of a bird like that. Okay, now let us look at some different birds really quick to get a better understanding of how different birds in different environments are going to use some different features. So this is one of my favorite birds that we have at one of our locations. So I mentioned I work at Chehaw Park and Zoo as well as at Flint River Aquarium. So this is a double-crested cormorant. We actually have one at the aquarium in our aviary. It's a really cool bird, and you can see it's got a lot of the common characteristics we've been talking about, like feathers and wings. And I want you to look at the feet. So it's hard to tell in this picture a little bit, but you can kind of tell that its feet are spread out on that rock and that there's webbing in between the toes. And so that's a really good hint at what kind of environment this bird does really well in. And so this bird is actually very good at diving into the water. And so they have a lot of different characteristics that help them be really good at this. The first is that this bird is heavier than other birds, and one reason is because they have solid bones. So something I didn't mention earlier is that a lot of our birds that like to fly, they have bones that are kind of hollow, which means that they're not solid or really heavy all the way through. They actually have little portions of air within the bone, which is a little strange to think about. But if you think about it, if you're a bird and you have to fly around, do you want to be heavy or light if you're flying? I'd rather be light. I want to be as light as I can be if I'm flying. So a lot of birds that fly have these bones that have air in them, which is kind of cool. But this bird has solid bones. So he's going to be heavier, but he wants to be heavier. These double-crested cormorants want to be heavier so that when they do dive into the water, they have more weight that's going to help them get through the water a lot easier. And that's going to be important because this bird eats fish. And so you can see they have kind of a sharp beak at the end, and it's a little bit longer and wider, and that's going to be nice for catching fish and holding on to them. So really cool bird, found in the water. That's why they have their webbed feet as well. So just like the duck that has the web on the feet to be able to kick water and push water behind them to swim better, this bird also wants to be able to kick and push water with their feet. And so having those webbed feet is going to be really important. And then what this bird is doing and why its wings are spread out, which is kind of goofy looking and cool looking, is they are drying themselves out. So one other thing that I mentioned earlier is that a lot of birds that are found in the water, like ducks, will make their wings waterproof and the water will fall off of the wings. This bird does not do that. They want water to collect in their wings, and that will also make them more heavy. So again, so that they can dive better. And so, but that means they're going to stay wet, right? If they're not getting rid of the water right away, it's going to stay wet. So he's out there and he's air drying himself so that he can get nice and dry and warm. So really cool bird, found in the water. And then I figured we could kind of switch gears and talk about a bird that's found in a much more dry environment, which is our ostrich. So this bird is not found in an aquatic water-like habitat. Quite the opposite. They're found in a dry, almost sort of desert-like habitat, but not quite desert, more like scrubby, drier habitat. And so this bird, we've been talking a lot about flight, and just kind of like our last bird is more of a diver. This bird also does not fly. And so what you can see is that they have really strong and long legs. And so what they do is they run. And so if you think about it, 45 miles an hour is pretty fast. That's about how fast when you're in the car you're going when you're driving through normal roads. You're not on the highway, but you're driving to like a store or something. 45 miles is about how fast you're driving. So if you think about it, a bird being able to run that fast is very impressive. And that's because they have these really long, powerful legs. Now, what I also want you to notice is that these birds have feathers and wings, though. You can still see wings on the side of the bird, but if they don't fly, why have these wings, right? Well, when a bird this tall and when a bird this tall is running, especially that fast at 45 miles an hour, they may lose balance. So what they're going to do is they're going to use these wings to balance themselves out. So if you ever try to stand on one leg, what do sometimes? You use your arms to balance yourself, right? And so that's why they use their wings. They can use them to balance themselves out when they're running. And they also use them to make themselves look bigger sometimes. But what I want to show you is I want to share this really quick. So I have the leg and foot of an animal very similar to an ostrich, which we have at Cheehaw, which are emus. And so you can see, just in comparison to my arm, this is a rather large leg and foot, right? So very cool. That's why they're able to run so fast. They have very strong and sturdy legs. They have nails that can be used to defend themselves if need be. So they have pretty sharp claws at the end of their toes. But what else is really impressive is things like ostriches, that other bird I was just showing you, they have only 2 toes. So an emu has 3 toes, which you can see. And one thing that's really unique or common only to ostriches is having only 2 toes. And that helps them run really fast. That's why ostriches can run a little bit faster than emus. But either way, it's very impressive. And they really rely on being able to move faster like that. So that's really cool. Okay. Now that the emus and the ostriches, they are primarily going to eat plant material because they're found in a drier environment. So what you can see is they have a pretty broad beak, and so that's going to be nice for eating plants. They can eat insects sometimes, but what's going to be important is since they're found in drier environments like the ostriches, when they're eating plant material, they're also getting a decent bit of water, which is going to be important when found in those drier environments. Okay. And then one more. So now let's talk about a penguin. So these penguins are really pretty. We all love penguins, right? But what's interesting about this bird is, so we were just talking about an ostrich, which is found in a bit a little bit of a hot environment, right? Those deserts, those dry environments. Well, I figured we could switch over to something on the opposite end of the spectrum again, which is a penguin, which are found in Antarctica, which is quite cold. And so they have, if you look really closely, they have a lot of really small feathers packed together really closely. And that's because they want to keep themselves really warm. So having lots of really closely packed feathers is going to be really important for them having a nice coat on them to stay nice and warm, especially since these birds also dive into the water. But unlike our double-crested cormorant, that other bird I was showing you that was diving right here, this bird's going to be diving in water that's not quite as cold as our penguin. So again, they're found in the Arctic, right? So the water they're diving in, sometimes they'll even dive into cracks in between the ice. So it's going to be very, very cold. And even when they're on land, it's going to be very windy and they're going to be very exposed to cold temperatures. And so having these really finely packed together feathers is going to be really important for keeping them warm. But what else I wanted you to note is that, again, I talked a lot about flight and feathers earlier, and this is another bird that does not fly. So what they can do is they can slide really well on their bellies. That is true, they do that, and that can help them get some decent speeds to dive into the water. But with that being said, I should show at least one bird that's good at flying. So I am going to, let's see if it'll let me do this here. Hopefully, you'll all be able to see my video here. but I don't know if it will. Okay, so we may not be able to do that, but I was gonna show you a video of an owl, but it is not working at the moment, so I'm gonna show you the feather instead. And so one of the things I was gonna show you in the video, which I want you to be able to see, is this is a bird that is very good at flying. And so that's gonna be really important for hunting. So this is more of a hunting bird. They do have talons that look a little bit more like this. So owls are very good at grasping onto food and catching it, and they want to be able to hold on to it. But if we look really closely at this wing here, you'll be able to notice all of these really cool comb-like feathers found at the very front. So let's see. Right at the tip, you can see those really fine comb-like feathers. And what that's gonna do is that's gonna be very important for breaking up air and noise. And so when they fly, you can't hear them, and it's very cool. And what that does is it makes them a little bit more sneaky, so you can't hear them when they're approaching and when they're flying through the air. But what else that helps them do is that helps them get away too. So if something is trying to eat them or catch them, they can fly and they will not be heard, which is really cool. And so they're a really cool bird, and they are also good, again, like I mentioned, at blending in with trees as well. So you can tell this looks like the color of a tree, the brown bark. And so when they're hiding against trees, they're very difficult to see. And then what I was going to show you with them is their beak looks very different from this kind of beak. And that's just going to be strong and a little hook. And that's because that bird is different from all the other birds that we've been talking about in that it will catch things like mice or amphibians, so things that have animal material. And so they want to be able to shred that animal material a little bit. But I hope you found this very interesting and that you learned a lot about birds and things that help us know what a bird is. And also, I hope you enjoyed learning about the different characteristics that different birds will have, whether they're found in the desert or drier environments or in the Arctic or in the water. And so that you can kind of, when you see birds, you can look at their different features and kind of get an understanding of why they may be where you see them. And so I hope you all enjoyed this talk and you learned something, and I hope you join us again in the future. All right, thanks so much, everybody. See you later.